Hi, it's Ranjan here, and today I'm with David Kemp, who is a planning consultant and a developer and investor, and it's excellent that you wear all three hats, because obviously you know what developers and investors want.
As well as a lawyer.
I
qualified as a solicitor and as a barrister, and had experience in both in the public sector and the private sector. So yes, it's sometimes I don't know whether or not I'm coming or going, basically.
Well, there's certainly a lot of trades there, and you know we've met on sort of planning issues and talked about various projects in the past. But tell us a little bit about some of the projects that you're working on at the moment.
One in particular is a very large project that this is actually a very good demonstration of how we've combined all various aspects of it. It's 20,000 square foot office site in Hyams Park in East London. A lot of people will say, well, where's Hyams Park? It's quite near Chingford. And we helped to source that building for a client. We persuaded the client to buy it because we saw the potential for at least another couple of stories on there. That potential was partly influenced through a relationship that we built up through the chairman of the local neighbourhood planning forum, and their planning documents form part of the local development plan documents. So at that time, those documents had not yet been prepared, so we had a bit of an inside track into what was going on and what the council might be prepared to see on that site.
So just talk us through a few bits about that, because obviously under permitted development you can convert an existing office building under circumstances into residential, but the two extra floors come under planning permission. You need a full planning application.
Yes.
So did you know you were going to get that before putting in the offer, or was that a bit of a punt on the extra two floors?
No, we knew that the council would in all likelihood support the extra floors on top. In fact, we've been a bit cheeky in pre-application because we put in proposals for another 3 to 4 stories on top, because we also know of another site round the corner where they managed to get a little bit extra on top as well. And also, you've got to assume that sometimes the council is going to try and throw stones at your scheme to try and knock you back a bit. It's part of that negotiation that goes on. But we got permitted development for 42 units in the existing building over 2 stories back in October, and we've just had a pre-application with the council. It's called an initial scoping assessment, it's not a full pre-app, and they actually wanted to see more development on there than we were proposing, so we're hoping to take it up to about 80 units in total.
So was the purchase conditional on getting this pre-app?
No, it was an unconditional purchase, because we pretty much knew we'd get prior approval, and we knew what the planning game position would be after that as well.
So this is an important point for people, because a lot of people are going around saying that, you know, they're looking at office to resi conversion sites, and these days the vendor seems to submit the PD in, and they sell it with permitted development approved for a scheme. So, and a lot of the times they're overpriced. So one of your angles is to say, well, okay, let's see what we can build on top of the scheme with planning permission. And that's where your skill comes in, engaging the likelihood of getting that planning permission.
Absolutely, and I completely agree with you about the difficulty of the local market, although it depends where you are in the country. We are part of a development consortium with a client who's just bought, or in the process of buying, they've had their offer accepted on a building up in the northwest for roughly 15 to 20,000 square foot. It was a £4.2 million purchase. It doesn't seem that anybody else putting in the bids really knew an awful lot about prior approval. And of course, the vendor was not a developer themselves, they're an insurance company. So as far as they're concerned, it was book value for them. So you may be working in a market or working with a vendor which is perhaps not so savvy. But of course, the difficulty is that with planning, most of the profit will be tied up in the planning play that you've got to put in on top. However, talking to some of our investors, they're now readjusting their expectations and now saying, well, quite frankly, we want to still do business in planning, in property development as well, and we accept that we're going to have to take that risk and live with that risk. But in order to take them along that path and do the due diligence and qualify the funding, as well as to convince the banks on development funding, development finance later, it's really important to tear into that due diligence, that planning due diligence at a very early stage and work up a very strong, robust case.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any rules of thumb? Because this is, you mentioned about costings and due diligence and all of that. What I hear a lot of people say, and a lot of concern that people have, is that a lot of office to resi schemes, the vendors are asking too much. Do you have any rules of thumb for estimating reasonably quickly how much you should be paying, how you estimate GDV, build costs, planning, surveying, professional costs, and the like?
Well, with GDV, for instance, then first of all, we'll look at deals done that have been on Rightmove in the local area. We won't want to draw the net too wide. One has to take a balanced approach between pounds per square foot and unit prices. It can be a bit warped. It depends upon what kind of deals that you're looking at.
You're talking about anomalies where the government poked their nose in, so the help to buy anomalies. Is that what you're talking about?
That can be. That wasn't necessarily what I was referring to, but that's a very good point in itself as well, because that can also warp the values that you're actually seeing on the face of it. What was the point
you were talking about then?
Well, the point that I was referring to was effectively an example. Actually, we were looking at buying an office building in Wimbledon.
Oh, right.
And most agents will tell you that for one beds in Wimbledon, the values are probably around £800, £850 per square foot, or they were when we were looking at it. And we shouldn't be going up to about £1,000 per square foot. It's not sustainable. However, the fact is that it's going to end up at about £1,000 per square foot if you start selling micro units. But people are not buying with the thought of what the pound per square foot is in their mind. They might be thinking, well, it's still going to cost me about £50,000 to £60,000 less than it would be if I was buying a one bed in a converted Victorian house down the road. And this might be a better location. And therefore I'll have a little bit left over for mortgage or for furnishings, so on and so forth, or a bit for a holiday as well. So that comes into play. On build costs, when we start looking at it initially, very early stages, we'll probably apply a global blended rate to it in our experience. In London, that may be around about £150 per square foot.
To convert a building?
To convert the building, which might be a global blended rate to include fees, to include contingency. It's just to get us ballpark as to whether or not we might be in the right area, and then we'll start breaking it down into the percentages, the usual percentages.
Is that including, I mean, because some buildings, as you know, like 80s built tend to be more brick.
That's
and
right.
70s built tend to be more glass and need more external work.
That's right,
which
yes.
of course you need planning for, and may have asbestos issues and all
Yes,
that.
yeah.
So the cost of converting the building can vary quite dramatically. You can have an easy ride if you've got an 80s building.
Absolutely, or if you're looking at Victorian buildings, for instance, as well. And some of them, their EPC values will be very low, which will affect the degree of noise insulation and sound insulation and thermal insulation as well. So that's also a very important point that you make, that you're going to have to be at some point more sophisticated in your approach.
Okay. So, I mean, we've raised some great points, and I'm really looking forward to your talk on planning. You're going to cover planning permission, permitted development, and regularising existing use.
Yeah, absolutely, yes,
Now, I mean, I just thought we could end on that, really, because I know a few people that have got properties which, for whatever reason, may not have the planning permission that it should. But all is not lost, is it? What can they do to regularise it, as it were?
Well, so what you can do, for instance, is you can go back and look at the existing lawful use, and you can apply retrospectively for it. A good example is probably best shown by way of example. I had a client who had a house that had been converted at some time before, more than 4 years ago, into 6 separate flats. Now, they didn't have planning permission, and if we were to apply now for planning permission for those 6 separate flats, he wouldn't get it, because each of those units is below the nationally described technical standards for each of the units. So, for instance, if they're 1-bed units, they would be below 50 square metres. If they were 2-bed units for 3 people, they'd be below 61 square metres. So the council would take enforcement action. And so what we did was we put together a certificate of lawfulness. You apply for a certificate of lawfulness together with evidence, which usually is in the form of leases, copies of licenses have gone in, statutory undertakings, statutory declarations, etc. We put that in a formal application. You pay a small fee of a few £100 for it, and within 8 weeks, usually under delegated powers, you get a decision from the council saying that use is now lawful.
So how long does it have to, I mean, it can't have just been used
4 years.
4 years.
4 years.
Continuous years.
4 continuous years. There can be small breaks in in the occupation of some of those units. For instance, if it was there was reletting that was involved, etc.
So what is seen as evidence? Because I mean, tenancy agreements are just tenancy agreements. What is seen as firm evidence?
Tenancy agreements, council tax, TV licences, the physical layout of the buildings as well, the planning records, building control records, and of course any statutory declarations or affidavits that you can obtain from people who lived there at the time as well, first-hand evidence.
Oh, right.
Yep.
So it's that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Always fascinating talking to you, David. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
David's going to be doing a full talk here at the Baker Street Property Meet tonight on all sorts to do with planning permission, permitted development and regularising existing use. Really looking forward to it. There are plenty more videos on this website that you can click onto, but the best way to experience Baker Street is to come down to one of our monthly meets. We typically meet on the last Wednesday of every month, where you'll find some always very, very knowledgeable speakers telling you about new angles and opportunities so that you can profit in the challenging times ahead. So get down and see us in central London. You can find out about our next event at bakerstreetpropertymeet.com. If you want to get in touch with David, your company is DKR Planning?
DRK Planning.
DRK Planning, and that's drkplanning.co.uk.
.co.uk, or you can email me at david@drkplanning.co.uk.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks very much, and bye for now.
Thank you.